Today I'll tell three stories of guys with loving families who decided that they need to shove them through 2-inch cracks 100 feet underground while half underwater and covered in spiders. Each story will end with a rescue mission. However, you can't know if this mission is going to be successful or not till the end of the story. The first story, Thunder Canyon, gets seriously intense and involves a software engineer who went on a cave expedition with experienced group and ended up fighting for his life. Brent is a 39-year-old software engineer from California, and due to the fact that he was an engineer, he was a very meticulous planner, especially when it came to planning unique adventures. And his trip to Thunder Canyon was no different. It's important to note that Brent is experienced caver and has been caving for years and is considered by many as intermediate to advanced caver. People in group of cavers he was about to embark were even more experienced than him. Thunder Canyon is a legendary cave for a few reasons. For starters, it's extremely elusive and not marked anywhere. It's only known within the caving community, and even learning the coordinates or general location of this cave system is more or less of a privilege. That aura for a lot of cavers already is so enticing, but it doesn't end there. The cave itself is dynamic. It's deep dark, open in some places, wet in some places, tight in some places, and it almost sounds like I'm not describing a cave. But trust me, I am. Personally, it's hard to imagine a cave scene enticing. However, if caving is your thing, Thunder Canyon had everything you wanted. It was rare, unique, and there was also many ways to approach it, as there was multiple entrances and exits that have been mapped out by other cavers. On Sunday, Brian and 6 other experienced cavers found themselves en route to Thunder Canyon, which included a short drive down on abandoned dirt road and then a 2-mile hike to get close to one of the entrances to Thunder Canyon. After doing some searching, they find one of the entrances at 11 a.m., and the adventure begins. Upon entering this cave, they descend, and short after, without hitch, the entire team clears the first obstacle. However, after this first rappel was a much larger task. It was an 80-foot drop. Now it's important to note that this isn't just a rappel either. This rappel is a descent into darkness, going through a literal underground waterfall that lands you into an underground puddle of almost freezing cold water. But for cavers, this is all part of the thrill. The guide Luca is the first to repel, and shortly after, the other cavers repel as well, until they are all safely at their first checkpoint. At this point, it was obvious that some of the cavers were already feeling the pressure of what this cave was about to bring. And and the guide even gave everybody an out, saying it's only going to get worse from here. And if you want to get out now. There is about to be tight squeezes, it's only going to get cooler, and the trip has just begun. But even with some unsure faces, everybody continued on the journey. After completing a few rooms and rappelling twice more, the group meets their first, one of these claustrophobic holes, which was literally named the Terrible Traverse. And it's called that because it takes a right angle into a 9-inch wide crack, a gap so tight that you can't even turn your head. Not only it's tight, the gap is also deep 200 feet from top to bottom. It's important to note that the group reached this hole at 3 p.m., 4 hours into their caving journey. The terrible traverse was one of the last things standing in their way before they were at the exit of the plant road. And it was, of course, at this point where everything was going to take a terrible turn. The guide to this expedition goes through this crack first, without a hitch. He's done it many times. Next up, one of the least experienced cavers goes through this gap, and he unfortunately gets stuck. Not only he gets stuck, but he panics. He had never been pinned like this before and was freaking out. None of the other cavers were going to be able to help him until he calmed down. However, within 5 minutes, the guide was able to calm him down. Within 10 minutes, the guide and the other cavers were able to pull him through and assist him out of the cave. Afterwards, 3 other cavers make it through this hole. That's the point when the guide takes all of the other cavers out of the group, leaving Brent to cross this hole by himself. Reasonable decision, because Brent was an experienced caver and had experience in this specific cave. However, Brent hadn't experienced the terrible traverse, and this experience would be one that he would never forget. It's important to note that Brent was very nervous about trying this gap, and he didn't even know that the guide had left with other cavers. So it was just simply Brent and one more caver behind him. Regardless, Brent began moving through the terrible traverse. One of the biggest challenges associated with this hole is the fact that you're not just walking through a gap or crawling through a gap. You have to move feet first down the length of the crack and then angle your body sideways to shimmy along before dropping down a 5-foot gap where you could then get your footing and squeeze through to the exit. Just to be extra cautious, Brent removed his wetsuit to ensure he had as much space as possible. However, after inserting his body fully in there, he was almost instantly stuck. He could feel the tension of the rocks on his chest. His hips were wedged between the walls, and the only thing supporting his body was his hand. He couldn't move in any direction, and it was at that point when he realized he was stuck. After being stuck for what felt like an eternity, the guide returned only to notice Brent was stuck, and after 2 hours of their best efforts, Brent was no closer to being free and was actually beginning to slip deeper and deeper down. Due to the stress of believing that he wouldn't make it out alive, Brent became rather lucid, and the final caver behind him, James, was simply telling him stories to try to keep him awake and conscious. Only at 6:40 p.m., almost 4 hours later, the San Bernardino Mountain Rescue Team was actually notified and mobilized to the position after 7 hours of Brent being stuck. The guide was signaling to a rescue helicopter that was sent, as the initial rescue team that showed up was simply not equipped to help Brent, and although the helicopter spotted them and help was on the way, it took an additional 4 hours for the helicopter to find a safe place to land and the specialized team to get on site. At that time, there was a very real risk of hypothermia for Brent and compartment syndrome, which is essentially when your chest is compressed for a long period of time, exposing you to the risk of cardiac arrest. Brent dying in his stuck position was a very real situation and was only becoming more and more likely as more time passed. Once the rescue team was finally able to reach Brent within the cave, their first priority was keeping him as warm as possible, as he had no wetsuit on and his body was trapped between two rocks that were much colder than his body temperature, especially drawing heat out of his body. The rescuers put heat packs around Brent and gave him an electrolyte beverage. But with Brent and the final caver at this point hypothermic, the rescuers had to move quick to save these individuals. As the rescue team began to attempt to move Brent, it was obvious that this was going to be a painful experience, as his ribs were tightly wedged between two rocks. As they began pulling at his feet, Brent was screaming in pain, and the rescue team even asked Brent if they should stop pulling him. It's reported that Brent literally replied, "I don't care if you break my ribs, just get me out of here." The rescuers used as much leverage as possible to lift the wooden board that bridged the gap in this hole that was supporting Brent, and they used anchors to try to lift his body. And with many failed attempts, they were able to move him 1, 2, 3 inches until they had him in a spot where their only option was to begin pulling his feet and essentially yanking him out of this cave. Brent's condition deteriorated deeper and deeper, and at 3:40 a.m., nearly 15 hours after entering the cave, Brent was pulled free out of the cave and rescued. After Brent was led out of the cave, the final caver quickly squeezed through without an issue, and the entire team survived this expedition. It took over 13 people to help rescue Brent. He survived, fortunately, but it's hard to imagine what the experience would feel like. And truthfully, I don't even want to paint a picture of me being stuck in such narrow space underground. Believe or not, Brent promised himself that he would continue caving. However, avoiding tight squeezes such as that one. The next story, Peruvian Intimacy Cave. Cecilio Lopez is a lifelong caver and adventure lover, and whether it be a natural talent or simply because of his lifelong experience in fascination, Cecilio had a very particular skill for navigating caves and squeezing through extremely tight gaps, seemingly with ease and almost no fear. He is a respected cave explorer, and at the time of the story, he is considered a veteran caver. Cecilio was even a member of the Madrid Rescue Group, meaning that he was more qualified than anybody, not only to explore caves, but also to save people stuck there. He was one of the Spain's most renowned rescuers and cavers. Cecilio was Spanish, but due to his unique skills, he was invited on expeditions around the world to navigate caves that no one else would dare, and to map out caves that no one else could. Cecilio had heard of this obscure and rare cave system in the mountains of Peru through some of his colleagues, and when he learned that there was a potential for ancient artifacts or structures to be found, he was instantly up for it. Cecilio and 9 of his colleagues began their expedition into the Intimacy Cave. The cave was reported to be at least a mile long and at least 12,000 feet deep. Cecilia was curious how much deeper and longer it was actually, and what secrets were hidden down in the bottom of this cave. Like any professional, Cecilio studied meticulously, learning of all of the risks associated with this cave. With the expedition underway, Cecilio led his group of colleagues into this cave on a multi-day expedition. The first few days went on without any issues. Notes were taken, beautiful sights were seen, and everything was going according to plan. But as they got deeper and deeper into the cave, squeezes only got tighter and the map only got more vague. After multiple days in this cave, the challenging physical aspect was obvious and accounted for, but the mental aspect was starting to take a toll as well, as these people at this point had been in complete darkness for days, only seeing the light of their headlamp. That silence of the cave was only broken by the sounds of dripping water, and on one of the last days of the expedition, tragedy struck, and it was during a rappel of the cave section. Cecilia was about to descend a modest 15 meters into the next room, known as the 13 days room. After the anchor was set, he began rappelling. He heard a cracking noise. His anchor had failed, and Cecilia was in a free fall, falling 15 meters onto hard rock. Cecilia somehow avoided all of the razor sharp rocks covering the floor of this room. However, he lied there motionless, in extreme pain, and with a suspected broken back. After regaining consciousness, Cecilio came to the harsh reality of his situation. He lied, helpless, deep in a cave that was already in an extremely remote and treacherous location, 400 miles away from Lima, Peru. He knew he needed to be rescued, but he also knew it was not going to be easy. One of Cecilia's colleagues carefully climbed down to where Cecilia was to assess the situation and realized how bad it was. One of the cavers in this party left to get help, and the others stayed with Cecilio to help monitor his health. Fortunately, Cecilio survived a fall that could have easily been fatal. However, now he has to survive what would likely be the most grueling days of his life, as after he fell and sustained these injuries, it would take almost a week for rescue personnel to make it to where Cecilia was. Keep in mind, Cecilia was in a deep remote cave located on top of a mountain where the entrance of the cave was at over 10,000 feet in altitude. When the medical team finally was able to find the location of the cave, hike over 10,000 feet to the cave entrance, they began the wild journey to where Cecilia was, to the bottom of this extremely advanced cave. They weren't even there to help him escape. They were simply there to provide comfort measures and assess his health. They built a makeshift base camp underground and began administering morphine to provide comfort to the injured man. Then, the medical team didn't know if they would be bringing him out dead or alive. Because Cecilia was still alive, taking him out of the cave was going to be extremely complicated. They couldn't simply drag him by his feet, and he, unable to feel his legs, was unable to help himself as well. The medical team brought a rigid stretcher that was specifically designed to help carefully drag Cecilio out without repositioning his body, risking injuring him even worse. With medical measures in place, it was up to the other cavers to request specialized help. The Spanish government was unwilling to send a rescue team. They also turned to the Peruvian government, which also denied to send help and save Cecilia's life. Cecilia's colleagues did the only thing they could do. They reached out to the Madrid Caving Society. And also, they turned to social media, begging for support to help save their dear friend's life. They did everything they could to pressure the Spanish government into saving one of their most valuable cavers. Some of Cecilia's friends from back home saw the news of this and they immediately flew to Peru to help save Cecilia themselves. That is a real friendship, and by the time these amazing friends were on the scene, there was already a small village at this cave entrance, consisting of medical staff, rescuers, and volunteers. Don't forget, this cave entrance is extremely remote and over 10,000 feet in altitude. It's not an easy place to reach, and the cave is extremely advanced. Many of the volunteers and rescue personnel that were dispatched are simply not equipped for this level of cave. And it would be only more of a liability for them to even attempt to save Cecilio. By the time that this rescue mission was fully underway, there was volunteer cave experts from Spain, France, Mexico, Peru, and over 40 Peruvian firefighters and military personnel actively involved in the rescue of Cecilio. And yet, there was still major challenges that took place. These 40 people need to eat, drink, they need to communicate with others, meaning that all of the progress that they're able to make is delayed significantly due to their lack of supplies. With this global team of experts on site ready to help Cecilio, they began the exploration into the cave. And once they reached Cecilio, They even explained their plan to him to hear his professional point of view on the escape that they had planned. Then they built a base camp 900 feet into the cave and began to set a complex series of anchor points across the entire cave so that they could essentially hoist the stretcher with Cecilio on it without him taking much more damage. On the 12th day, when they began drawing the stretcher out of the deep cave, things took a turn for the worse, as on this day winds were higher than normal, unfavorable weather and rain were adding an entirely new level of complexity into this rescue mission. Despite the weather, a rescue helicopter was able to take rescued Cecilio to the nearest hospital, where he was treated, and after many months of treatment, he amazingly made a full recovery. The case of Cecilia Lopez is so insane, and that's really heartwarming to see how passionate people were about saving this man's life.